Now, when I'd read his paper the first time, Bernard and Adele, so remember there's no web in this time, it's difficult to get papers, so there was a news group called comp.ai, and I put out a posting there and I said, does anyone know the email address of Bernard and Adele? And this is some weeks later, I got this letter posted to me, and it said, someone gave me this today, so I thought I'd write you my email address. I have two, and there's Bernard's email address. So Bernard didn't even trust the web at that time. So then we started up a number of conversations about his work, but he was just so supportive of me at that early stage. So another paper that was very influential was by John Gashnick. And this is his paper that describes backmarking. Now this is Ichkai, 77 I think. So again, this is something I really like, that you could just do it on one page, but the downside is it took me about 3 months to understand it. If he'd written 2 pages, I'd probably have understood it in an afternoon. So that's backmarking. And reading Bernard's paper, he describes backmarking in 2 paragraphs, and very clear, lovely, lovely stuff. So where am I here? So I think it's also interesting to think why the paper that I wrote in Ichkai 89 was a bit of a failure. And one of the reasons was it wasn't very clearly explained. The second is that it was very complicated, and I want to quote something that Robert Tarjan said in one of his papers. He said, "It is one thing to have an algorithm that is theoretically good. It is another to have an algorithm that is simple enough that someone would want to program it and use it in practice." And at that time, explicit forward checking with dynamic backtracking, or DDB, failed that test. It was just too complicated. Anyway, so 1990, I wrote up the conflict-directed backjumping and submitted it to Ichkai in 1991, and it was rejected. It was turned down. So I wrote up a technical report, and again I emailed Bernard and Adele, and again, Bernard was emailing me, but he would also print off the email and post it just in case there was a problem. You can see the business card down there. Again, isn't that nice? So Bernard said, perhaps I can make a brief suggestion or 2 that may be of help. From what I can tell, your paper deserves publication. Sometimes it is harder to publish in a conference proceedings than in a regular journal, in spite of the fact that conferences count for less in terms of getting tenure, etc. Don't let the rejection by Ichkai 91 put you off. I'd suggest submitting directly to a good journal. In particular, I suggest Computational Intelligence, since that's where I published the paper, Constraint Satisfaction Algorithms, that your paper is based on. So, again, he's given me support when I needed it. And another email that he, rather than copy me in on the email, this is email he sent to Vipin Kamoor, and he printed it and again posted it to me. So Vipin was writing a paper for the AI magazine reviewing constraint satisfaction, and in this he says, lastly, so this is to Dear Vipin, I have recently received the thesis and some papers on some excellent work on constraint satisfaction problem algorithms by Patrick Crosser, Strathclyde, Scotland. And he goes on, he says, I encourage both of you to get in touch and recommend that you cite his work in your survey. So it's just nice when you see that other scientists and academics supporting others at critical points and the effect it can have. So So there were a number of papers that came out of this as well. There was, I guess you can edit some of this out, but let me just get to a point. I think I got my papers in a bit of a mess. I'll just stop and get that. So the paper in '93, I presented at the conference on artificial intelligence applications, the paper on backmarking and backjumping, and it was quite surprising. I don't know why I did this, but I used to write a review of the conference I've been to and make it available to friends and colleagues, and I kept some of them. And this is a review of the conference on 9th Conference on Artificial Intelligence for Applications, and it was held in the Disney Yacht Club Resort in Orlando, Florida. Now here's a nice fact. The 1st to the 7th of March is Speed Week at Daytona. It was estimated that there were in excess of 400,000 bikers in Daytona for that week, plus 5 Scotsmen. Brian Morrison for Kawasaki, Jim Moody for Yamaha, Ian Simpson for Suzuki, and Steve Hislop for Ducati, and me. I also met up with a number of American racers, those that I contacted via the net, Rec.Motorcycle Racing. I met Janet Gunn and her father. Her father is 65 years old and still racing. I know this because it said so on his shirt, and he's retired. He used to work at the IBM research labs, and when he was there, he developed a diode. Some of you won't get that. I also met Steve Tice. Steve is a software engineer, and he came in 8th in the endurance race and competed in the 600cc Formula 2. Motorcycle racing and motorcycle racers are the same the world over. I think that Daytona was my first and only glimpse of a familiar reality in Florida. Now, another point in this that I thought was interesting is, this is a section of what here called Food for Thought. As one would expect, there was a conference banquet. I sat beside 2 Europeans, Frenchmen to be exact. The first course arrived. The conversation was convivial and not technical, so I've got a footnote here. We talked about motorcycles, Star Trek and food. The main course then arrived with the coffee. We had a banquet without wine. This struck me as unusual, and decency prevents me from reporting what my French colleague said. There was an after-dinner speaker, and by the sound of it, he had more than just coffee with his main course. Anyway, one of the Frenchmen was our dear Christian Bessie, and it was absolutely a picture to see him drinking coffee with his main course in a banquet. So, this is my last bit on the conference. On a personal level, I think that I am still a bit confused about my trip to Florida, and this may be a result of cognitive overload. Although this was not my first time in America, and although we share a common language up to a point, the landscape and everything in it, motorcycle racing excluded, was alien to me. Being in Walt Disney World didn't help much either. And here's a footnote. Everything in Walt Disney World is fantastic, including the hotel bill. On top of the room charge and sales tax, there was a Walt Disney World tax. Okay, so was CI 93 a success? Was this paper a success? And that doesn't really matter. It's okay, it's not going to. So going back to what Tarjan said, that for an algorithm to be successful, it should be simple. It should encourage people to implement it, to program it, and then use it. Everything in the paper, I think, was having looked at the algorithms explicitly and getting all of the data structures and information out of them, and recognizing that there was a forward move and a backward move, because things were done iteratively. It then became easy to combine them. It became like a mechanic's job. So things were simple, everything was explained from backtracking, then Back marking was shown just as a small modification, the same for back jumping, etc. So it was simple and incremental and easy. So elegant, this is from an interview with Tarjan. Elegant algorithms are easy to program correctly. It's much more likely to be used and you need to have confidence in the result it produces. So I think the algorithms here passed that test. So and here is another test that it passed. I deleted all the files by mistake one day, which is quite a wake-up call. And it only took me an afternoon to code all of the algorithms back up from memory without looking at anything. So that was another proof to me that they were simple and easy. Don't you stop for a minute?
Okay.
Or maybe I should just say a couple, well, maybe just a couple of things. Right? There are a couple of things here that I should say that what's still to be done. So there are things in the paper I left as future work. So actually in the paper I highlight 48 other algorithms that are still to be implemented, and I don't think they have been. I also identify room for improvement within forward checking, back jumping and conflict directed back jumping. And I should say who influenced me in this, right? So Oli Jakubitesta coded all of these algorithms up, as well as a final year student to check them. And originally, I'd called conflict directed back jumping GBJ. And in fact, in my PhD thesis, it's called GBJ. And Peter Hendry said, it's not that, that's the wrong name. And he called it conflict directed back jumping. So it wasn't even me, and obviously Bernard Adele helped me so much with this. But it's also just interesting to look at the references. Almost all of them are to Rina Dechter, so almost everything's based on Rina Dechter's work, very big influence. And 2 papers by John Gashnick. So if we had your test, if you look at the citations to try and work out who wrote this paper, if it was anonymous, you say, Rina Dechter wrote this. It's Dr. Evil, and this is for Francesca as well. This is Rosie. Rosie. There you go, darling. Yes. When this started, it was in the early 1990s, 91. So again, you don't have the World Wide Web, you don't have Google, you can't just key things into Google and find papers and download them and read them. So you depended upon people to communicate with, friends that were working in the same area. So Barbara Smith and I had a nice arrangement that if we found some paper interesting, we'd copy it and put it in the post and send it to them. And so Barbara went to, Itchkai, 91, I can't remember, was that in Australia? Yeah. Anyway, she copied for me the papers that she thought were interesting, put them in the post and sent them to me. And this was the one that just blew me away, which was Cheeseman, Kanevsky and Taylor, where the really hard problems are, and they identify the phase transition.